You and thank you for being here at the second meeting of the MFP Task Force. Very important meetings to go over, as we did in the first meeting, to go over what the different levels of the MFP are, and in-depth look at that with our own the LDOE's Beth Jono. And so we thank you all for being here, and let's begin with the roll call.
Mr. Birkin,
Here.
Dr. Brumley, Ms. Champagne,
Here.
Mr. Claxton, Ms. Conaway, Dr. Corville, Mr. David, Senator Edmonds. Mr. Irwin has a proxy, Ms. Blanchard, Mr. Harris, Ms. Hughes, Mr. Hollis, Dr. Kingham, Ms. LaFleur. Dr. Mills has a proxy, Ms. Harris, Mr. Morris, Ms. Parker, Dr. Polito,
Here.
Dr. Pope, Ms. Posey, Dr. Procopio, Ms. Romer, Representative Schlegel. Ms. Shirai has a proxy, Mr. Calix.
Here.
Dr. Walker, Dr. Baker, Mr. Bujol, Dr. Riley, Ms. Whitney. We have a quorum.
Oh, very good, thank you. So the first item, first item.
Your first item is consideration of a follow-up report from LDOE finance staff regarding MFP Formula Level 4 items discussed at the August 21st MFP Task Force meeting.
So you need a motion to consider item one. Senator Edmonds, second. Ms. Romer. All right, any objection? Hearing none, we will begin. Ms. Silno, it's all yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. We're going to start this afternoon by talking about the questions that were posed at the end of the meeting in August, and we have some information to share with you on each of the items for which you posed those questions. So the first subject is going to be the mentor teacher stipend allocation. As you remember, this is the funds that have been allocated in Level 4 for mentor teachers, and we take that count each year, and they are afforded a $2,000 stipend. The first question you had was, what is the number of new teachers coming into the resident program? And those statistics right now show we have about 1,800 new teachers coming in at the most recent count. This is an indication of a need for mentors. Mentors are especially needed for those new teachers who enrolled in the alternative certification program, because those teachers have to receive 5 hours of training and supervision by a mentor. The second question you asked was, what is the number of mentors? Right now there's 2,600 mentors, and the numbers continue to grow annually. Statewide, they actually have 3,200 mentors. One of the other questions you posed was, does every resident get a mentor? And the answer is yes. Every resident is partnered with a mentor. It is preferred that that resident and that mentor have the same focus and in areas that they work. Practitioners are the teacher of record, and therefore they partner with a mentor teacher with any certification. But obviously the best practice is believed to be that you align the certifications whenever possible. Next, what services are provided by mentors to the residents? The services include sharing their professional knowledge and experience on a one-to-one basis, acting as a positive role model and exhibiting enthusiasm to get them encouraged by this profession they've chosen. They provide ongoing training and teaching skills. They model excellent communication skills necessary in the position they're in, and they demonstrate how to work as a member of a large team to be successful. What services are provided to alternate certification candidates supported by the mentors? And that is, they provided the same type of mentoring services as the undergraduate candidates receive. How and what frequency are the mentor teachers paid? So remember we talked about last time that they are entitled to $2,000 per year, but the final stipend amount is really depending on how much time they actually act as a mentor during the fiscal year. An example of that would be a mentor who spends the entire school year supporting one resident. They would easily be entitled to the $2,000. But if a mentor supports 2 residents, each 1/2 of the school year, the percent of the $2,000 stipend is generated. The mentor would still be eligible for the full $2,000, but the way that we generate that allocation is it's based on the percentage of time that's dedicated to each one of those residents. And we would collect that information from the resident side so that we know how much they actually spend on the residents. Another one is if a mentor supports just one resident for half of the year, the allocation would only be $1,000 for that stipend in the year in which that occurs. What are the retention rates for teachers who have had a mentor versus those who have not? Right now, there's no data available on that, but plans are being made to initiate a data collection connected to the new teacher experience. And that new teacher experience is a comprehensive induction program in which we'll be able to collect data to analyze at the end to see what difference this is actually making. So in summary, the information we've learned today is that mentors' numbers are still increasing slightly each year. And that means that the allocation, we anticipate the allocation will actually cost a little more as we move forward. And the residents receive a one-on-one attention from all of the mentors. With that, I'll stop. Those were the questions that you had last time, but in case you have anything else, we do have program staff here from the department that might could answer things today, or we can receive more questions with regards to the mentor teachers.
Very good. All good? No questions?
You good? Okay.
Oh, one question.
Yeah, so Beth, I'm not sure if this goes to you or somebody else, but I think the way we should be interpreting this is it's encouraging to see the increased number of residents on an annual basis. So if that's the right interpretation, I'm encouraged by that. And then I guess the other part of it is the retention, so that we don't have as many going out or more than we do coming in. Do we have an update on that as far as what the balance is there? And then also, what is what has been the incremental increase in residents so far? Is there somebody here today that can help us with that, either one of those?
I don't know that we have, I'm not sure. I'll ask. Okay. I do know when we were first planning for the mentor stipends, that there was some analysis done, and at the time that were only projections, but they did anticipate the residents, increasing quite incrementally. Those first couple of years where residents, those programs were really beefing up, it was about a 400, resident count that we could anticipate because we were trying to run financial simulations. But I think that maybe that has exceeded some of those early projections that we made. So I do think that, 1,800 is probably a couple hundred beyond what we anticipated at this point in, say, a 3 or 4 or 5 year period.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I'd like to request that we get that historical data, what the increase in residents has been for as long as we track the data, and then what is the balance relative to those leaving the profession.
Ms. Smith, you good with that? Yep.
May I just clarify, you want just teachers in general or specific to, do we know if residents are leaving the profession?
Yeah, no, so it was two parts. So the first part was, what's the incremental annual increase of residents, right? So hopefully that's a positive trend. And then I'm interested on the other side of the equation, right? How many are leaving the profession So therefore, we have some sense of the balance. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, moving on.
All right, we'll keep going. Okay, now we're going to talk about the International Language Associate allocation. As you recall, this is the allocation in the formula that provides two things. One of it is a salary supplement for those international associate teachers, and the second part of that is we do provide stipends. One is a first-year stipend to resettle here, and then the others are retention stipends in year 2 and year 3. And so you had a series of questions surrounding that as well. So the first one is, how is the International Associate Teacher Program currently being delivered by world language teachers within the state, including immersion and regular coursework offerings, and the number of program waivers for international language courses over the last 5 years? So right now, there's 298 public and non-public participants in this program, in the IET program. There's 282 public teachers that are funded out of that 298 with MFP. 186 of those teachers are French teachers, and 112 are Spanish teachers. 231 are immersion-specific program teachers, where 67 are the early world language teachers. 28 LEAs employ international associate teachers right now, and that's across 20 parishes. The international language course waivers, this is a history over the 5 years of those that were granted. As you can see, it's varied across the years as to what might actually be requested. They are given on an annual basis, so school systems have to apply for these on an annual basis. That current year, there's only 10, and I've indicated where those are approved right now. You also asked about what was the feasibility of delivering instruction of international languages through the EMIRA program or the virtual hub that we discussed last time. So we'll talk first about the EMIRA program. This is a voice recognition software that actually does have some capabilities to deliver the world language courses. It does read aloud and provide information to the learners in English or Spanish. It is not currently available in French. It does have some basis in the science of reading and includes that dyslexia risk assessment. But it only addresses one mode of communication, would be one of the drawbacks of delivering the courses using this software. But there are some possibilities. The world language team assessed EMIRA and said it could be a tool for teachers in possibly settings such as teaching native Spanish speakers, working in a traditional school setting, in a two-way immersion setting, or in tutoring time might be a possibility. It could be a tool to extend the capacity of the current teachers teaching Spanish by moving part of the face-to-face time to an online option. And it could be as a tool for instruction in one language. Then we talked last month about the virtual hub concept, I believe, that is currently in place in Calcasieu. And this, if you visualize this, this is that one teacher who monitors and facilitates learning across many students, learning various languages with online teachers. This setting has worked well. You can see that the world language team noted this had been used in Nebraska and Wisconsin successfully. And using the local teachers, the virtual hub could be a solution to offer more choice in languages studied. It could be access to higher levels, or it could extend those courses in high school. Visiting teachers, one drawback is the visiting teachers are not allowed to teach virtually. These would be the teachers that we recruit from other countries through the IET program. That is not considered to be acceptable per the immigration rules. They do need to participate in face-to-face, and so they could not do that individually and be the sole deliverer of those courses through the virtual hub concept. You asked what are additional ways to retain world language teachers. Here we identified that there were 811 local teachers currently. They are not certified as world language teachers, but they are employed in early world language programs and immersion programs in the pre-K to 8 setting. We could identify a barrier for them as possibly thinking of some way to help them become certified. That would be one option. The other thing is that we have 150 local certified world language teachers in schools that do support early world language or immersion programs. And so it could be that their lessons could possibly be enhanced with some technology or extensive guidance, so they may be able to merge the Amira or the virtual hub settings into their lessons to help retain and make the delivery of the courses that they are in charge of easier. It would kind of be a blending in that case, is what the team decided might be a possibility. What are additional ways to recruit the world language teachers? We talked about surveying just district personnel to see if for some reason there were existing multilingual teachers out there that maybe were not actually using those skills right now and could support these courses in the school systems. We could look to establish additional agreements with other international governments to see if that would help increase the number of teachers we could actually recruit to come to Louisiana. We could possibly support the creation of some program modules in multiple language to encourage high school students to become world language teachers. That would be something that maybe we could use through the internship program or some of the other high school interventions we're using right now to recruit students to become teachers. We could also possibly research the adding a fast forward TOPS University pathway so that high schools could earn an associate degree in this curriculum. It perhaps may not require that many more offerings, but that would be another way to actually have a pipeline created. But we would definitely need to research that and see if that was feasible. You also asked, we talked some about whether or not the stipend amount was adequate. There was some testimony about how expensive it is when the teachers actually come into the school systems now, and you wanted to know what that cost might actually be these days. Those annual expenditures are looking like over $12,000 plus airfare for them to actually come here and resettle, and that stipend is currently only $6,000 right now. We estimated that the average teacher would need about $10,000 probably to actually support them moving here. Might be ideal at a $10,000 amount rather than that $6,000 amount from the research that was done towards this effort. So with that, we know that the number of language immersion schools is anticipated to increase. We talked some about that last month, about how this is the planning and the survey work that's been done by the team here in the department. We know it could be approximately 2 per year that would open, which obviously increases that demand for teachers. There may be these other ways that we could recruit or retain more teachers. We also could explore these other environments using the online versions and these other online type environments. And we may need to consider increasing the first year stipend. So that's just kind of a summary. That was a lot with regard to that one topic that you asked a lot of questions. So I'll stop right there and see if there are any other questions. We do have staff here, I think, from the World Language Office that can maybe answer a few more questions, or we certainly can take those and get back with you at the next meeting.
Questions, comments? Mr. Morris.
Yeah, I have a couple. So on slide 15, the list of waivers. If I look at that list and I look at all the districts in the state, doesn't seem to me like there's really that many waivers out there proportionally. So would it be an accurate assessment to say that all the other schools do actually have the classes in place and there are no limitations on the number of teachers?
Yes, I believe that's what we believe to be the case. Those were statistics gathered for the board. It's been a few months, but I think those were presented, and so it is very few on an annual basis.
So we're
that occur.
confident that this is offered in all the other schools in the state, and there's no limitations with regard to shortage of teachers that can conduct a foreign language class.
I'm not sure I'm the one to answer that. We may need to ask for some more clarification from the team. I'm not sure if, I think we'll have to get that information to
Yeah,
you.
I just want to make sure the messaging is clear here, right? When we're talking about a teacher shortage in this particular area, is this a clear reflection of the shortage? I got some feedback that there are a lot of schools that really aren't aware that a waiver is required, so they don't fill out the waiver, they don't offer the class. I just like some clarity there. Is this an accurate reflection? If so, that's fine. I just like some clarity in my mind if that's actually what we're trying to address.
I think it's clear that these are the systems that have submitted the waiver. It may not be the case that they actually have the instruction taking place in the system. Potentially they don't and simply didn't submit a waiver. You know, we don't have a team that goes out to investigate whether they have the program or not, or did not submit a waiver.
So bottom line, we don't really know if this is an accurate depiction of the classes not being offered because we don't have the appropriate teaching resources. Or this is just our best guess, I guess.
Well, it's not our best guess. It's accurate information based on what's provided from systems that submit a waiver, because legislation calls for them to do this, and if they don't do this, they're supposed to submit a waiver. And so these are the systems that have provided a waiver. So we have to assume that if they did not submit a waiver, then they have the instruction in place. But we can't verify, or we haven't verified that they do indeed have the instruction in place. We can just share that the fact that there's an absence of a waiver tells us that if they're in accordance with the law, they should be providing that instruction.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Well, and let me just add, we started the conversation because we talked about the factors that go into the calculation of these numbers, particularly for the salaries, which right now we have a cap of 300 teachers. I think the information that we provided last time just talked about how the immersion and the other world language programs, we anticipate those increasing, and at this point in the formula, is there a need, because we do anticipate those growing, is there a need to raise that cap? I think that's the conversation we had last month and the question that was posed to the committee to see whether or not there were any concerns about that.
Right. So I'm just trying to get a confidence in the demand here, and are we really addressing the necessary supply to meet the demand? That's where I was looking for, right? Okay, second question I had was, just wanted to share that Senator Stein and I and a delegation from Louisiana met with the French government last week and signed the 4-year accord for Codefil, so that the French government would continue to provide for the next 4 years French language teachers. There were a number of takeaways for me, one of which was that the teacher shortage is not unique to Louisiana, it's not unique to the United States, it's a global issue. And so there's a teacher shortage in France. So the fact that we are actually getting foreign language teachers from France, they're doing that while they have a teacher shortage in progress. So just wanted to raise that awareness with everyone. So we really appreciate the foreign language teachers that are coming to us from other countries where they have an inherent teacher shortage. And then my third point was actually a comment on slide 20 when we talk about potential for adding a fast-forward university pathway. Another takeaway was at the U.S. Embassy, there were a couple of U.S. college graduates, college interns, that were serving as diplomats at the U.S. Embassy. And so I learned that there's a role here for a career pathway for foreign service. So most of us, all of us, are familiar with the military service pathway. There's also a foreign service pathway. And if you have the appropriate foreign language skills, then you could apply for a position in this occupation. So I just wanted to raise awareness there. If there is really any concern and any interest in developing that pathway, there is a career for that.
Anyone else? All right, on to high-cost services allocation.
As you recall, high-cost services is the funds that we allocate every year based on applications from the school systems. They have to submit applications that demonstrate they have spent 3 times the normal cost to educate a student with the most severe need for services. You asked how many students are identified as special education in the MFP student count, and you asked how many students are identified by exceptionality. You know that some of this information contains PII, so we presented what we could this month, what we normally have on the website. So this is a history of the February 1 count. That's how we actually count the students with exceptionalities annually. And you can see it has quite a bit of change over these last few years. If you notice, from February of 23 to February of 24, there was a pretty substantial increase. And when that occurred, of course, we needed to fund that. And as we ran simulations last spring and presented that to Bessie and to the legislature on cost, we were able to identify that there had been quite a few systems who were like playing catch up from times where they were not able, either the families did not bring the children in and didn't have them evaluated during the pandemic was one explanation. We also noted that there was just a lot of backlog because of the pandemic at a time where those type of evaluations were not as done or not as accessible. And so we did have that quite a large increase. As you can see, prior to that, during the pandemic, the numbers went down, and that was because families either did not bring their children to be evaluated. So actually, the number at February 1 of 24 and the number at February of 20 are much more similar. And we do expect that to probably be the case as we take the February count this in 25. The next slide
Ms.
shows
Pat,
you.
can I ask a question here?
Yes.
I was told something about dyslexia is not in this count, or it's just now beginning. Is that correct?
Dyslexia has not traditionally been one of the 16 exceptionalities that are recognized in the 16 that are recognized by the federal government and thus in the state as well. And so they do not have IEPs historically, and so they're not counted in the formula.
And is that going to remain the case, or is there going to be dyslexia going to be added to the 16?
I'm
Not
not aware
aware.
that the federal government will change that. That would have to be a whole nother discussion about, yeah. So this slide, we are able to show percents at this point. We are not allowed to show individual information on exceptionalities, but this gives you a feel for the distribution of the population of where the percents are greatest or less with across all the students that are counted. You can see these are the exceptionalities and these are the percents. The less than 5% it just indicates that the number is so small that the PII rules do not allow us to display that. And then anything above that, you can see, autism is at 9%, and the special learning disability is at 35%. I did look at some older, the last couple of years, and those are very similar. The only one that had increased was the intellectual disability in the past year was only 10%. So that did go up slightly. These numbers are from they're from 22-23. We don't have this analysis yet for 23-24. Okay, so in summary for the questions you asked about high-cost services, the student count increased over the 4,000. I think that's just important to remember that we kind of anticipate that being, just a blip in the statistics. And then the number of students with intellectual disability, as I said, when I looked back at 21-22 versus this 22-23 statistics, was the only one that changed, and it was an increase of 1%. So I'll stop right there and see if there is any questions.
This is why I'm never running for office anyway. On the high-cost services, after we left, I was thinking about the gap that we see between the demand versus what we're actually able to allocate. Why don't we put the right number into the MFP resolution and request the full amount? Like, I'm assuming, just like looking at what you showed us today, the department can see all the data, correct, and understand how many high-cost students there are. I don't know if I'm phrasing this right, Beth, but I'm curious, why do we allow that gap to exist versus putting the number that we know is needed?
Up until now, Bessie has not made a decision to explore that cost. That amount and that calculation itself has been in here probably from 14, 15, somewhere around there. So Bessie would have to, contemplate that, and we would have to, identify what the cost is, and they would have to recommend that in the resolution to make any changes.
Got it. So it's driven by what's currently in the formula.
Right. The formula right now, on average, pays about 60% of what they request. So the money that we have available pays about 60% of what is requested. So.
And so that would be a push on Bessie to have a conversation about prioritizing dollars for that purpose?
Right. And the role of the committee is to make suggestions to Bessie.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, note that Ms. Romer has added a work item to the Bessie work list.
It's a big gap, and for some of our most marginalized students, it seems like that should be a priority if schools, by law are required to serve all students, and there is that gap in funding. I would also guess that some districts, some charters are better able, you have to apply for those dollars, correct? And I'm sure some districts and charters are better at that application process than others. So makes me wonder, is the gap even bigger than what we're seeing the demand? Maybe there's more demand and they just haven't put that. So I would be interested in Bessie considering that. I don't know if the ask is that there be some type of annual, if you're able to generate an annual report, even if it's based on prior year, that would show what the demand, what the need is, maybe?
Well, we know through the application process what
But
what they're
couldn't-
applying for.
But couldn't you tell that, again, the data that LDOE collects from districts and charters, do you have to see that in an application, or don't you already know? The application is merely people following your paper trail to receive the dollars, but do you have the data without folks doing that application?
Well, the data that is involved in an IEP and the demonstration of the services that are provided is very lengthy. We do not have statistics on all of the, because each child is different. And so although they have to report that to us in the ESER system to demonstrate that they're providing services, I don't know that there's a way to evaluate that, because it would be hard to make a prediction of a cost, from a cost perspective, if you had to evaluate 90-something thousand students, you know what I'm saying, about what they needed. I would provide a little history because I've been here a long time. When this was started, and Bessie supported this, it was a partnership. It was meant to be a partnership between what the school systems actually could support themselves, and they are supposed to support that base education amount, so that is subtracted from the cost that they report to us. In other words, they spend X number of dollars on a child, we back that out, and if whatever that excess is what's put in the application, and that's what is supported at a 60% rate. So that was the philosophy back then when this was implemented. Bessie certainly can change that. but that was why it is structured in such a way that it is.
Interesting. Last question, do you know how, like, we just talked about the application process. Do we know if most districts and charter schools are actually going through that application process? Or is there a world where there's even more dollars that we're not, or more need that we're not aware of?
When I look at the allocation, the data that I get, it looks like everybody's pretty much
Just
asking.
doing that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, moving on then.
Okay, we also, under this topic, related, but not exactly, under high-cost services last time, you asked about school-based Medicaid. And so we're providing today some information on that situation. So school-based Medicaid is a reimbursement of the general funds expended, hiring those licensed healthcare professionals. There is some untapped potential that includes LDH modifying the current state plan. There is a plan that has to be, that LDH is in charge of, that incorporates what is allowable to be claimed for school-based Medicaid. Their current state plan includes additional reimbursements for providers under provisional licensed professional counselors, licensed master social workers, school psychologists. LDH changing the current state plan regarding their personal care aides requirements. Over the years, there has been some improvements in what LDH has applied to get approved. We've had to work with them and encourage them to add things over the years. But there can always be some improvements as we learn more about what is actually needed out in the school systems. This gives you an idea of how the increase in the money that's been drawn over the years since 1819 through the 22-23 year that we have, sizable increase there in the amount of funds that have been drawn using school-based Medicaid. At one point, it was very just so laborious that when we would talk to the school systems about it, it just wasn't worth them having a staff person on, to pay a staff person to do all this paperwork. But, things have changed. There's been some improvements in that. And so obviously, they benefited from this much larger draw of funds. The types of school-based healthcare, just so you can have a picture in your head about that, it can be nursing services, therapy services, behavioral services, and transportation services. Quite a variety. Again, at one point, it was very, very minimal, did not include all of this. So Medicaid funds are still available. There are some, that could still be drawn. It's a reimbursement program, and there could be a survey to determine the providers that were not participating. We're always looking for ways to get better with this. Obviously, we have to work cooperatively with LDH, but always looking at ways to improve the amount of funds that people can capture through this program. Some of the current practices on educating school systems, we now, for the first time in the department, it has been a few years, actually have someone totally dedicated to educating the school systems, again, because it is so complicated. So we do things like group in-person and virtual webinars to make sure that they're equipped to actually, pursue this reimbursement. We do small group learning activities. We do in-person and virtual one-to-one technical assistance to make sure they understand the rules. And there's targeted time study support through webinars for the providers themselves. So the idea is that the department, in cooperation with LDH, has really ramped up the educational opportunities so that school systems can maybe spend a little less time, have someone on their staff who can learn all these very complicated rules and then work to gain the most reimbursement that they can. So I'll stop right there since that's a new topic, and we do have staff here from the program office in case there's any additional questions.
It's me again.
Ms. Romer.
Hi. There was some interesting ideas there. I don't know, on your first, I think it was the first slide. I know how to advocate, like at Bessie in the legislature, but how are we advocating with LDH? And maybe that's not a question for you, Ms. Sino, but like what's the connectivity? I'm looking in the back, Superintendent Brumley. Is there a connectivity beyond this person doing Medicaid between LDOE and LDH? There were some good things here, and I think there's a world where, I'll speak strictly from the charter school perspective, if we understood where to go advocate and to message on some of those things, we would love to do that.
Well, LDH is really in charge of this.
Right.
You know, and so we work very closely with them through, you know, the staff we have here in the department, but they are really in charge of that state application and what they can get approved with the federal government. So, you know, advocacy with them and giving them new ideas is always helpful, but they have the final say so. And it is lots of rules around which they have to dance, you know, in order to add these things. They are not the final approver, but they do present the plan, in other words, to make this happen. And again, I remember a day when we had like one thing on that list, you know, where they didn't want to reimburse it, and that the process was just so labor intensive.
Yes, I definitely
So
heard
a lot of progress has been made, but certainly if there's lots of individuals at LDH who run, you know, this, and we could certainly put people in touch with those individuals, so.
Ms. Pope and I actually were at an event last week, I think it was, where we heard from LDH. There was an education panel, and we talked about the fact of how interconnected those agencies are in serving children, you know, in different components and capacities, and, you know, the desire, I think, to see more coordinated, collaboration type of conversations between the different entities. Again, that doesn't sit with you, Ms. Sino, but it just seems like it would be a natural place for Bessie to lean in, LDOE, in establishing more regular touch points with some of those divisions and agencies that, again, are so relevant to children's lives in our state. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Morris.
Yeah, just to add to that, my history on this is that this was moved from LDOE to LDH. They're really better suited to handle this work. So I think, personally, I thought that was a good move. But, you know, it seems to me like what moves this conversation is obviously, hopefully, it's the student services, but also the financial impact. So on slide 30, you're showing the total federal share of Medicaid funds drawn, and you can see the increase. My question is, what's left on the table? How much more opportunity is there out there? Are we talking about another 5 million, or is it 50 million? How much more opportunity is there? And then my second question is, has anybody calculated or estimated what the cost benefit is? So when you have the ECE conversation, the number I keep hearing is there's a 13% return on this. We take that to the legislature, get more people to buy into the concept that it is actually a 13% return. Who's got a better return on investment than 13%? Let's bring it to the table and talk about it. So my question here is there an estimated cost-benefit analysis for the return here? So two questions there. What's the LOC, and do we have a cost-benefit analysis?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Michael Como from the Department of Education. There is not a certain pot of money that's left on the table. It's a cost reimbursement program. So the more providers we can have in the school systems that are eligible to provide services and be reimbursed for those services, and the more time they can spend providing those services, more money that the school system can take in. I don't have a cost-benefit analysis. I think that might be an LDH question in terms of what the return on investment is.
So on the first question, my understanding, I visited some schools, and they've got a nursing station and, you know, some pretty attractive resources so that parents don't have to schedule doctor's appointments outside of school hours, pull their kids out of school, and so forth. Seen other schools where they don't have that resource. One of the reasons they don't have the resource is they don't talk the language, right? The school people don't talk the language with the medical people. So it's too much paperwork, takes too much time. We don't have the resources to fill out the paperwork, so we don't provide the services to the students. So my question is, do we have some sense of how many schools are there like that? right? Where we'll be serving X number of students. We average with the we know the student populations in place today. Those that do have the services, the average spend is X. We can look at the number of schools that don't have the services. What's the population of those schools? Apply the same X. You come up with an estimate for what the lost opportunity cost is. So it seems to me like you got to know what the prize is before you go chase the prize. Try to convince people that this is a good way to invest state dollars. So to me, that's a follow-up. And then the second one is, why don't we have a cost-benefit analysis? If this is something that we're really serious about, we see value in here to provide services for students, we should be able to give some estimate for what the return on investment is if we're asking for dollars to invest. And I understand there's some politics. I understand there's some politics behind all this too.
I think this
so-
conversation, Mr. Morris, is floating way beyond educational practices in schools. This is a function of the Louisiana Department of Health. And I agree with Ms. Romer, like to the extent that we can collaborate, we should do those things. And in fact, I think the more of this particular program that can be shifted to the Department of Health where they have the subject matter experts, that's the path forward. Mr. Como does this work, but he has, he does school buses as well on the side. So,
So Superintendent, I want to be clear. I'm not trying to add to LDOE's workload, right? I'm trying to address the issue. I started out my comments by saying that this was parked in LDOE shop for a long time, and now it's moved, or at least.
not yet. We are in the process, and we are engaged in these conversations for which Ms. Romer speaks around being more efficient in these processes. And those are conversations between agencies and the Commissioner of Administration's team on how we can be more efficient with these services. But at the same time, I want to be pretty upfront that the Department of Education needs to focus on education. And while these services are critically important, I just think the subject matter experts are in LDH, and that's why we're trying to do as much as we possibly can to make sure that they're the ones conducting these analyses, providing support.
Right.
And we're in those conversations with the highest levels of government in the state of Louisiana to move that. But Mr. Como would not have a return on investment because that's not
So
what we do.
my push is not to put load on LDOE where you're educating students, okay? You're not specifically addressing the health care of students. That's not my push. My push is to address the need for the support for students. And if it comes from LDH, fine. I would like to see the recommendation come out of this group that we go address the issue, not so much who should address the issue. But I think it's a critical issue, as Ms. Romer pointed out, to provide these services for students. It's federal money. I don't understand why we can't quantify what's left on the table. Again, is it $5 million? Is it $50 million? Based on the unserved student population. And then it's really a matter of, is that a significant population? Is it a significant amount of money? Should we be working it relative to other priorities? And let's focus on that, maybe not necessarily which government agency should be working it. Let's focus on serving the kids first. That's my push, again, not to put load on LDOE, but hopefully this work group will come out with a follow-up that we've identified that this is a significant student need that's being met or not. And if it is being met, that's fine. I'd just like to run it to ground. But again, I'm not trying to put a round peg in a square hole, get LDOE to do something that they're not resourced to do. I appreciate the efforts to move this to the health department. It's a health service, makes sense. So I don't want to miscommunicate there. Thank you.
Ms. Champagne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Am I not on? My question is this a direct allocation from LDH, or is it a state allocation with the Medicaid funds that come through from the state? Because if that's the case, we may not have a pot of money that we can go through if it's coming from the state dedication of Medicaid that the state has to match, or if this is a direct allocation that LDH applies for through the federal government.
No, this is part of just the bigger Medicaid. Yes,
the
it
statewide
is.
Medicaid.
Right, it has to follow all the federal rules with
Right.
regards to just Medicaid. It is a reimbursement program, so it's not a pot of money. It is based
Right.
on need and the application for those services.
That may be why there's no extra money, because the state's allocating it. And I do see where 2021, it says expanded state plan. That is when the state expanded Medicaid, right?
Yes,
They-
before.
The state, the
Yes, before that,
legislature
it was only for
expanded
special
Medicaid.
education students, and then it was expanded to all
So
students
this is
that were
basically
Medicaid
the
eligible.
state allocating the dollars. They have to go to the federal government with a match. Do we know what that match is now? On Medicaid match? That the state has to?
I don't think we know exactly what I'm not a Medicaid expert.
I'll find out. I'll
Yeah.
find out. That's
Yeah.
good. I'll ask the legislators.
Yes.
But I think that's why we're not seeing, there's no extra pot of money.
Senator Edmonds.
Thank you.
On the mic itself, on the mic itself.
Okay, there we go. All right, thank you. I've just so happened I have chaired the Joint Medicaid Oversight Committee for multiple years, and I believe this is an interesting conversation. And I think what would be in order is that this is a monster budget when you deal with Medicaid. And it's easy to get lost in space because I've been doing it for years. So I think what would be the better avenue, and I think what Dr. Brumley is referred to, and I think he's correct, is that what would be a good request, I think, from this committee is to refer to us and let us call in one of our agendas to research what part of the Medicaid budget might be available and let them to have some discussion to say, this is what we see and this is what we don't see. Because the Medicaid budget is, we're talking about $20 billion worth of money. So, I mean, it's a huge budget. So I would welcome that if it would assist. I think the idea, the concept, the discussion is helpful, but I think for this group, I think our position ought to be is to request that the legislature, through Joint Medicaid, which would be glad to do, we'll bring LDH to the table because they're the ones that administer the fund, and bring this up as an agenda item to let them bring the discussion, report it back. I think that gets you some answers that maybe all of us would be comfortable with without LDOE, which is really they're just trying to bring you up what could be, might be, and I think it's lost in that discussion is what I think.
Right. So if we need a motion to follow up on that, then I'm happy to offer that motion so that we can get the appropriate people to work it.
If it's a pleasure of the committee, we'd be glad to entertain it.
Okay, sounds like a second to me.
So we do have a motion on the table to move this forward to the House Medicaid, Senate Medicaid Committee?
It's both House and Senate. It's a joint Medicaid oversight.
Joint Medicaid Oversight Committee. And Ms. Romer seconds?
I just wanted to actually applaud the department. It was mentioned that there is a person now that's working with districts and charter schools on Medicaid and understanding the very complicated process that is. It's been a huge help. And so just wanted to recognize that was something led through the department and others to make happen. And again, speaking from charter schools, who are often standalone, very small, that takes a lot of effort. And so her assistance has been just super, super fantastic.
Maybe that's a foreign language interpreter that we haven't actually identified.
So was I correct in saying that you would second that? Okay. So did everyone understand the motion? Any objections? Seeing none, then that passes. All right. Nothing else on that, Ms. Shona? We'll continue.
No? All right. We're going to move on to the Career Development Fund, or CDF, as we call that. You had questions with regards to CDF, and remember, this is the allocation that's provided in Level 4 that provides money for technical courses that are required for students to obtain those industry-based certifications. Your first question was, how are teacher shortages in both college and secondary schools being addressed to increase the availability of courses? As you recall, we provided you information last time that shows the distribution of the courses across the universities, and there were some zeros in some of those and some blanks in that, and you asked about what was being done with that. We're engaging with LCTS regarding getting more high school teachers certified to teach dual enrollment and content in CTE. Exploring with the Board of Regents the status of the LSU's dual enrollment teacher certification pilot, and providing technical assistance to some colleges to increase access to their virtual dual enrollment courses. So I think there is a team of individuals trying to work on this particular teacher shortage. What support's being given to school systems to encourage CDF dollars to be spent? There is a packet of information we refer to as the CDF guidance document being provided to inform schools about how to, what are the expenses that they can allocate to CDF funds, as well as they're looking for new and innovative uses of the funds, some of which we would ask you to look at blending or braiding your federal funds, or all funds. What is the current status of work towards developing a uniform tuition schedule? The latest information shows that LCTCS has moved to a standard pricing for tuition across all their systems. The dual enrollment courses, they're all charged the full price of tuition, and the post-secondary institutions can no longer provide school systems with a discounted tuition. I know that some of you talked about that last month, and you just wanted an update on what the final decision was on the tuition. What is the status of the LDA review of non-expenditure of CDF funds? As you recall, we talked about and presented information that the department was working on an accumulation of those balances of CDF funds, and that was to be shared with the school systems and the superintendents with regard to their balances, and then trying to provide technical assistance on what they could do with those. Your handout that should be sitting on the dais with you actually provides a school system by school system depiction of what those amounts look like as of October the 1st. So that was information that you had requested last time. In summary, right now for CDF, the technical assistance on allowable expenses for CDF is being provided to enhance the use of the funds. Again, we try to give pictorial guidance to make sure that there's advice on how to blend funds. That is always the preferred way and the most efficient way to use dollars to support those programs. We've mentioned that the uniform tuition has now been instituted, and that the Board of Regents continues to work towards certifying more teachers, helping with that program, and that some colleges are trying to increase the access to dual enrollment through virtual courses. I'll stop right there with any questions you might have on CDF.
Questions, comments on this?
I just have a quick question.
Yes.
That Mary Beth Hughes with Lobby. I was flipping through this document we have and just looking at the different allocations, and it looks like there's a pretty large disparity in the middle column and the current available balance. That just seems like a lot of money on the table. I didn't know why that number is so large. I don't know, it just seems like a pretty large jump. I didn't know if somebody else could speak to that.
Mr. Claxton was talking about that a little earlier. Dave, do you want to comment on how that?
Sorry, our program staff that was supposed to be here, I think is tied up in another meeting.
Sure. Ken Bradford, Chief of Staff, Department of Education. At the last MFP Task Force meeting, I came and just, when there was some discussions about there being a need for more CTE funding for high-value CTE coursework and internships, and I explained that there are still balances on the table that school systems have. Just to give this body some context, this funding source has been available for the last decade, for 10 years. In 2014-15, the diploma structure was set up differently by Bessie, and there was a career diploma that was set up. About 25% of our students are on a career diploma. One of the things at the time that we heard from school systems 10 years ago was that there needed to be two things to have higher quality CTE in the state of Louisiana. Number one was students needed more time to do coursework. So the board adopted a policy where students on a career diploma, they only had to do 2 social studies and 2 science courses, and that would free up 4 Carnegie units for them so that they could now have 9 total CTE units available in high school to take coursework. But not only did they need the time to do this, they needed the additional funding to do this. And so for coursework that was aligned to high-wage, high-demand job sectors with industry-based credentials that were on the focus list, this was put into the MFP. And what it does is it provides approximately $250 per student per course to be invested into buying the materials for the course, teacher training for the course, so if a teacher wants to go get a credential so that they can deliver the course. And most recently, it's even included tuition. It can be used for tuition at a Louisiana community and technical college system. So that was the intent of it. These are what the balances are. We have historically always provided guidance and resources to school systems, but since the last meeting, we have done a couple of things. We have created this updated sheet of balances. We provided that to the Superintendent's Association for them to share. They've also asked that we come to their winter conference and do a presentation on these dollars to make sure that they are aware that you have dollars that are going unused in your school system that can be targeted to these high-wage, high-demand job sectors and internships that actually align to the new accountability system that's been adopted by Bessie. And I'll pause there and see if there's any other questions.
Mr. Bradford, can you repeat the things that the dollars can be spent on? I got tuition, I got equipment, what else?
Course materials, teacher training, tuition, transportation, fees to take an industry-based credential. So to give you an example of
But you can't
this.
cover teacher salaries. I think that's.
No,
the
it
one.
does. It's not intended to cover a teacher's salary.
Okay.
It is not. It
Okay,
is
got it.
intended to cover those course materials and supplies. So for example, if I'm a high school student and I am in a welding class, and that welding class requires welding rods or it requires a shield, this is the funding source that is supposed to pay that so that the students are not obligated to pay that and so that they have access to the courses that they need. If I'm a student and I'm in a ProStart program, ProStart is a culinary program in high school. It was on the statewide focus list. When you're in that class, obviously there has to be food purchased, but also the students need chef uniforms. They need to have thermometers. This is the funding source that's supposed to pay for that. Not the student, not to be charged a fee. It's supposed to be this set of dollars.
And these funds are applicable, just for clarification, these funds are applicable for which courses or which classes?
So the department puts out a list annually that shows here is a list of the high-wage, high-demand industry-based credentials, and any course that is in a series that leads to that culminating credential becomes eligible for funding. So think if I was a student doing an NCCER welding course progression in high school, when I take the NCCER core course to learn the basics, the school system gets these generates these dollars.
So does LDOE have a list or a brand or something that
We annually
encapsulates all this? What do we call it?
We call it the Career Development Fund List, is
Career
what we call it.
development? Okay,
Yeah,
the CDF
Course
list.
eligible list.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
then what we do at the end of the year is districts self-report back to us what their balances are. And this is a funding source that is eligible to be carried over.
And all the classes on this list, or the courses on this list, they feed into they feed into a credential.
A culminating credential, that is
Got it.
correct. Yes,
Thank
sir.
you, thank you.
I have one follow-up question. The high-wage industry-based credentials, is that list from LWC?
Louisiana Workforce Commission.
Yes.
Statewide focus list,
Okay.
yes.
Mr. Bradford, was waiting on Mr. Bradford, so he's correct. So we had this conversation earlier, but also districts with some of this carryover looking for 2 or 3 years down the road. Like if we have, I think Ms. Walker even mentioned it last month, when you're planning for your juniors and seniors, you're trying to make sure you have that money for the next school year also, since there is a carryover. But Mr. Bradford's correct, so things like we use, we buy the welding boots, the boots that they have to wear, their gloves. We provide, I have a CNA program in our district, so we provide the things for our CNA program. So this is very vital to what we do, especially on our career paths. So that's why we advocate so much for these funds. So when you see a lot amount, the district may be carrying it over for their next year juniors. So it's there. So we're not wasting the money. We're just planning like you do with your own checkbook and your own balance to make sure it's not gone. So you know you're getting it.
It's, but you do get additional dollars yearly.
Yeah.
No, I mean, new dollars yearly.
Yeah, and it depends, I believe, and correct me if I'm right, it's the number of students we have, the number of classes, there's a formula that goes into that. So if you drop some of the dual enrollment classes, or you don't have as many students in those programs, the money would go down. And am I correct on that, Mr. Bradford? Not set.
It is based on the course. So if there is a course title, American Welding Society Welding, NCCR Welding, that particular course title is what generates it. So if you have a student enrolled in a one Carnegie unit CTE course, they generate these fundings. Now, again, this is for the CTE courses that are aligned to our high-wage, high-demand job sectors.
So I'm trying to understand,
So if our numbers go down, our money goes down. So if we're losing kids and not in those pathways, the money the next year will not be
Sure,
there.
but
So you're trying to plan.
And it goes the other direction.
Yeah,
When,
you get more, it goes up.
when your students are enrolled in more high-wage, high-demand CTE courses, the numbers go up.
yes, ma'am.
So we were one of the school districts that had a high carryover, and one of the things that we talked about was we opened a new high school. So we didn't have direct funding for that high school, but we know we want to put a welding lab in that high school. So a part of our strategy was to hold on to some of our funding so that we didn't have to necessarily wait for the state to update us, and we could put that welding lab in the new Prairieville High School. But one of my questions is what about the prerequisite courses to a CTE course? So for example, if a student is taking ProStart, but one of our prerequisite courses is Family and Consumer Science. So right now, we're not really allowed to utilize our funding on Family and Consumer Science, but it is something that the students will need in order to qualify for ProStart 1 or 2.
Sure.
So my question was, how can we expand our opportunities to be able to utilize that funding in some of the prereq courses that students need in order to be successful in the actual CTE course?
So I think and the department does do that, and we do frequently, we update our list to include those courses. But I think, one, there has to ensure that there's a cost associated with that course, because the school
Right.
systems aside, this is just for the coursework on the high-wage, high-demand, where you have told us that, you, and I say you as educators,
I
the
get it.
education system has told us that we've got a teacher that needs to go earn a credential. So a family and consumer science teacher, I can't speak to you right now and say whether they're having to go and get a credential to teach basic family and consumer science. I can't tell you if that student in that particular class for that particular year needs to go take an exam at the end of the year. But certainly, we have put the courses on here, and some of them do include prerequisites. I gave an example of one, NCCR Core. That is a prerequisite course to getting into NCCER. But I would say this, I don't think the intent, and again, I was part of these funds from the very inception in 2014-15, the intent was not to take those set of dollars and then hold on to them for some future expense. The intent was, I can't put a student in an EMR class, because an EMR class, it costs $159 to get the medical equipment for that particular student in that class. The intent was for those dollars to be spent now on that student to address that student's cost, that student's credentialing, and that teacher's training, not to be put in reserve for a rainy day down the road to support the building of new schools and others.
So I don't think I just described down the road in a rainy day. So if you attended Dutchtown High School in 23-24, you were eligible to go to a welding class. If you were redistricted to Prairieville High School in 24-25, there is no welding class. So the funds were used to set up a welding class for that particular school. So there was no taking the funds and sort of holding on to them. We actually allocated them for the current students that were in that school where it didn't exist before.
Sure, but also systems are carrying over money, and when you go to high schools and you look at their student handbook and the fees that they have to pay at the beginning of the year, we do have some school systems that are charging students $40 to get a ProStart uniform. We are having schools that are charging students $159 to get an emergency medical responder training kit that are carrying over balances, and those are on the school websites, and that's what the funds are intended for.
And I think we're correct. We've asked Mr. Bradford to come to speak to all the superintendents to do the do's, do nots, what's, break it down for us, so every superintendent will have that, and we're going to provide it to them. So we asked him that earlier. So, I mean, there's a lot of, you're thinking the number of superintendents, we have over a third new superintendents, and it's a lot of turnover. They may not know all that, so we've asked for that already. So,
Ms. Romer?
I think that's a great idea.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. You answered one of my questions, was the money intended to be used in the moment? My question became, when I see charters and districts on here with a carryover, what does that mean? I think you helped me with that. What's the history? Why is the carryover allowed? Why isn't that money returned when it's not used? I'm just curious. I mean, again, is it because you're projecting that you're going to need it down the road, as I heard, or?
No, when it was developed, it was intended that the money would all be spent in 1 year. That's why there's an annual allocation, and that we start the year over in July, giving an initial allocation. The work that was done at the time was, the need was immediate. And so from way back when the program was started, I don't know that the board that, was in place at the time, or the department, envisioned that there would be any carryover, that it would be net needed on an annual basis.
I'd love to hear from someone actually doing the work, superintendent, someone about the need for that not to be changed.
well, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me, the dual enrollment only kicked in a year or two ago to spend the money on that, am I correct? So in the original plan, that wasn't there. So this has morphed a little bit more. So I think it's a working piece.
In looking at this is 8-digit stuff. I mean, this is tens of millions of dollars that is still in the bank. I'm glad for this discussion.
Does that require, I'm sorry, Chairman, does that question that I just posed, how would this group move forward on looking further into that question? Again, it may not be a total return at all, but it could be a portion gets returned. I don't know. I guess my question is, as a group, is there a motion to say we want to look into that policy? Is it a policy?
It would be something that would have to be incorporated into the next presentation of a formula. So we would have to actually say, for example, similar to what's done in SCA, that there be a reallocation of the funds at some point in the year.
So, but is that part of a legislative line item that says certain districts get certain amount of money or anything
No,
like, so this is not?
This is in the formula, it's in level 4, so any changes to the parameters around which we allocate these funds or administer these funds has to be done through the formula, because the cash is actually in
And
the
therefore
formula.
goes through the legislature.
Yes, it has to go through the legislature.
I guess my question is, has there been consideration through the department that when you see these carryovers and the next year's request is made, do you take the dollars that are left over from that next year's request?
No,
would
that
be
is
the
not,
easiest.
that's not the math, that's in the formula currently. The formula strictly says on an annual basis, they are to get X number of dollars per course enrollment. So the math and the provisions in the formula resolution say this is the way, this is the methodology. So that would need to be changed, in other words, because this cash goes out the door. In other words, it is paid out, entirely throughout the year. And so we have no reallocation, I'll call it provision, in the math right now that would allow us to say, in April every year, we take that money back, whatever's not been spent, and we reallocate it to other systems. They get an annual allocation. It does fluctuate up and down because it is tied
Based
to
on
course
student.
enrollments, right? But we would have to change the math and the resolution to do anything else. And we can, if you have some ideas, we can simulate what that might look like. run like a simulation if you want to study it further. But
When-
that's how SCA is
When are the
done.
funds transferred? Are they transferred based on a forecasted student enrollment or actual enrollment or October? When are the funds
Well-
actually transferred to the school system?
So the actual dollars, in July, we start with 75% of the prior school year. And the actual data is collected through the class enrollment system, and we don't get that data until late January or February. And then we do a reconciliation between what they had been paid starting in July to what their actual numbers were. And we only do 75% to be, conservative, but we do that reallocation in the spring. And so if they actually went above that 75% of the prior year, they will get a little more money in March, April, May, and June, the rest of the year. If the opposite's true, we take away money those last few months of the year. So we do reconcile it to actual enrollments. That's how it's based right now.
Okay, but there is a 75% transfer in July, that's what I'm hearing, from the previous year.
Right, that's what the allocation is based on,
Thank you.
yes.
Mr. Claxton?
I would like to know this, and Mr. Bradford and Ms. Bethany, prior to the ESSER funds, was this a problem? Or are we seeing that maybe we've spent a lot of ESSER money on some of these areas and we haven't touched these funds because of that? Because, we have been doing a lot. So prior to 20, did we have this kind of carryover or this kind of problem? Would y'all be able to answer that, or?
There has always been carryover in the program, which is why we have collected it, and we have always shared it with school
Yeah.
systems that you have a balance and you have
Yeah.
carryover.
And I don't have a problem being part of the association, and I'm sure Ms. Walker also, being able to share with them. We're going to have to start finding a date, because I think a lot of the issues we see that come up through legislation could be taken care of from the department or from other sources, instead of going and trying to make laws and change laws to say, look, Dr. Brumley or Mr. Bradford, can you tell LAS or send out, you have a date to spend this by, or a certain percent, to make sure everybody's, because there's a lot of other things going on too. So we want to make sure we're taking care of our kids, we're taking care of our facilities, our equipment, but we can do that as a group, or as, just say, hey, Beth, send us a message, we'd like you to spend all your funds by this. If there's any issue why we need to roll over, let's say you have summer programs or something you're doing with the, because I know in the summer we pay, actually kids, I'm trying to remember which ones that go to the college, we're paying them to go, they're getting certifications, that runs through July. So if your cutoff's going to be July, let's say August, we can work that together. And I don't want to hoard it, I want us to do right by it, because this helps us.
So it seems to me the pleasure of the board, you want,
You have a question on that end?
oh, I'm
No,
sorry.
I was going to, if you have something to say,
No,
please
go
go. I was going to ask what that next step would look like.
What I'm hearing is the pleasure of the board that this be looked into, and it is going to have to be through some kind of mechanism, say, hey, this money is not to be banked, it is to be used, and used on an annual basis, however that looks like. Am I hearing that correctly?
I guess my question would be, is that a policy that sits with Bessie, and for Bessie to consider the policy? Is it legislative stuff? Is it just MFP resolution? Like, where does?
I think it could be an agreement between entities.
Yeah, I don't know that that would have to be placed into the formula itself. The formula deals with the allocation of the
Right,
funds.
but
But right now, information is collected, on these balances, and certainly there could be some technical assistance that would direct the school systems to say, you should spend this money by about this date.
Can I ask one more question, please? I'm sorry, but I'm thinking about the gap we see on the high-cost services. And now you're looking at CTE carryover. And I don't want to do harm to CTE. That's not my point here. Could those dollars that you recoup become a solution on the gap on high-cost services?
The shift of money around like that is a little difficult.
It doesn't work that way?
Yeah, it doesn't really work that way. Just the mechanisms of state administration, it would be difficult. In other words, you have to have a definitive amount of cash that you ask for in the formula, and any moving around might be, a unique situation.
Something that happens in my bank account, but
Yeah.
not in this one.
Yeah. We are not allowed to do that, we are not allowed to do that under the rules. We get appropriated funds, and you have to use them for that purpose. And so,
But it does, okay, thank you.
But I think we could come up with an agreement with Mr. Bradford and Dr. Brumley and the CNO, and we can get that information to the superintendents and say, look, this is the deadline, this needs to be spent, the percent of it, whatever they need to follow the guidelines, we can take care of that.
I have one comment. We're saying all this money is left over and it has to be spent in this area. I mean, we continue to say high wage, I can't remember the other term. Thank you, high demand. But I know in my parish, we have many young females that are interested in doing a TOPS 2 diploma, but yet they are not necessarily interested in the areas in which we offer, like welding, things of that nature, because it's not really a womanly demanded field. And so if we have all this excess money, it has to be spent within a CTE course. Can we not maybe open some things like cosmetology? Though it's not necessarily falls under that spectrum of high wage, high demand, that's areas that money could be spent on, and that just, recruits more students into CTE, even though it's not necessarily in that high wage, high
Yeah,
demand.
I think what you're just seeing here, though, is this one piece of CTE funding. So there is funding available for cosmetology. There are other dedicated CTE funding sources, like the base MFP has an adder for a CTE course. This is specific to those courses that cost more and require more to get their credential, to get the teacher trained, and offset those costs, and to provide the transportation. So if a school system doesn't have a course that's aligned to high wage, high demand, this can pay for the transportation for that student to actually go to their local community or in technical college and get those courses. But the intent of this particular set of funds is to help our school systems get access to and pay for those high wage, high demand industry-based credentials, and now even more so internship opportunities. This funding source can be used for school systems to help offset those costs and maybe absorb all of the costs of students participating in an internship program.
Right, and I think that's great. I just want to make sure that the money is actually being spent, because most people, it looks like they're not really spending for whatever the reason may be.
I think you and I are in agreement that the money is not being spent, and that's why I came to the table last time when this body, it was being shared that we need more CTE money, and I came and I shared that there's CTE money currently available, and we need to be good stewards of that dollars and not go ask for more money when the money is in place. And then I think there's a second part of that. We need to work in further collaboration with our school districts on these latest set of bundles of credentials that were recently approved by Workforce, which will be part of accountability. And we need to get the tools and the guidance to the school system so that they can come in and leverage these dollars to get those students in the right courses, get your teachers trained in the right credentialing areas with this dedicated set of dollars.
Quick question before we move on. Can you define high wage?
Actually, Jessica Valalungua will address that. She's been working closely with Workforce and Economic Development and all them.
Yeah. So I'm not going to quote it exactly because it's not numbers that are I've memorized, but it is defined by a certain percentage over the average wage of a particular career. Does that make sense? So the state average wage, and then I believe it's something like 20% over that average, but please don't quote me on the percent. I don't have it committed to memory.
And just echoing, I'm not quite sure, the comment that was just made, there are IBCs that are going through Board of Regents right now, specifically around early care and education, which won't affect the MFP because they don't require a lot of heavy equipment or any real cost, but there is a high need, and I just wanted to try to get clarity on that definition of high wage. Thanks.
Mr. Morris.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, first of all, I just wanted to applaud Mr. Claxton, and Mr. Bradford for the communications collaboration here. I understand Mr. Bradford is going to be visiting.
I've been coaching him.
So I just wanted to publicly recognize that effort and applaud you guys. I really appreciate every opportunity to improve communication. I think it benefits us all as well as our students, so thank you both for that. And then be happy to get this on the Bessie agenda to make this a formal discussion item and see if we can't get a change in policy where folks appreciate the intent of the funding and students get the benefit of that immediate use. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Anything else on this? Excellent conversation. Next.
Okay, now we move on to supplemental course allocation. This is the second part of the career path. This is the funds that actually are provided for the cost, to pay for the cost of secondary courses that are above and beyond the traditional classroom, dual enrollment being the largest use. You asked some questions about SEA, so the first one was, what are some of the barriers that prevent SEA funds from being spent? So what's going on right now, there is a reallocation policy in the formula for SEA funds. So that means they are allocated amount based on the number of students in grades 7 through 12 at the beginning of the year. They know how much that is. They are provided technical assistance by the program office with regards to ways in which they should utilize those funds, but they take the temperature of how much has actually been expended of those funds early in the winter, early spring each year. When they do that, they know what the status of the pot of money is, and if in fact someone has not spent money by a certain date, that money is actually removed. And that is reallocated to those systems who may have actually had expenses far beyond what they were provided funds for. A little bit, the reason this came up and we initiated the conversation about this is that there is smaller and smaller amounts freed up in those SEA funds for the Jump Start Summers programs. We have traditionally had money that was taken back during the reallocation process that then could be provided to those systems who wanted to implement the Jump Start summer programs. But actually, they're doing a better job of spending the SEA funds now, and so it puts the Jump Start summer programs at slight risk of not having enough money as previously budgeted, I guess, for those particular programs. And so some of the barriers that prevented, the spending was some systems always reserved more than they might have needed for the Jump Start summer programs, and then they wouldn't necessarily be spending their SEA programs. We've seen that has been corrected in the last few years. There are a few schools that were not spending, some of the smaller charter schools, particularly in New Orleans, that were not spending their funds, but they have become very creative with that and created a consortium where we now allow them to combine all those funds so they can use it citywide to support those courses. Let's see. So now that the LD has worked with school systems and they're spending their SEA funds more fully, and those Jump Start summer programs are being impacted, we are recommending that the systems then look to other pots of money to fund those Jump Start summers that are eligible. They get to braid those dollars. So they can use the CDF funds, which we just talked about. They can also use Perkin funds to supplement those Jump Start summer programs. They can braid, for example, the Perkins can pay for the teacher stipend and materials. The CDF funds can pay for IBC costs, and the SEA can pay for the student stipend. What other steps should school systems take to ensure that the Jump Start summer programs are available? Again, create a dedicated pool of funds using multiple sources. The braiding again comes up as a solution. For example, a dual enrollment course on a college campus, SEA funds can pay for tuition, CDF can pay for materials and fees, and Perkins can pay for transportation. So the technical assistance that's being provided on this right now helps the school systems visualize the way to braid these funds. So good news is that we do see the SEA funds are being more heavily utilized. The Jumpstart summer programs, the funding of them are becoming a bit more challenges, but the department has provided and will continue to provide technical assistance with regards to how to creatively fund those programs so they can continue for their students. So with that, we'll stop and see if there's any questions.
So I heard you say that these funds in the SEA can be reallocated.
Yes, the current math in the resolution says that they are provided these funds starting in July, and then we take the temperature in the early, I would say the January, February, late February temperature to see what they've spent. And if they have not spent those funds, then they go into a pot to be reallocated amongst the other entities based on their needs.
Is it because of the particular language in the SCA that it can be reallocated there and not in CDF?
That's correct. The formula that was designed for SCA has always included a reallocation. I don't recall all the rationale around that. I don't know if y'all remember. But it always was intended to be, looked at a certain time of year and reallocated to those. I would guess at the time we had some statistics that showed perhaps that would have been the way to manage those funds. CDF was not designed that way.
Yeah,
And-
Mr.
and
Chair.
I'm sorry, I was going to respond. One reason for that reallocation is these, so just to back up a little bit, so this set of dollars, which is, just north of $20 million per year, it goes out on a formula base. It's the intent of this is for students to take courses not otherwise available at their school. The BESI board approves who those providers are. It includes our higher ed providers plus 40 other private providers that offer courses. They're evaluated, they're put in the list, they give us a course catalog, those courses are available to students. One of the reasons that it was reallocated was because it wanted to target those courses that seniors needed in order to graduate. And so when we get through a little bit past in the senior year, what we do is we do that temperature check to see if the funds are available. And if a school system's not going to use their funds, they are taken back by the Department of Education, they're released back to us, and then we redistribute them to those school systems that need those dollars. And so it would not be uncommon if I'm a junior in high school and I need to go to summer school to get some courses, this is an opportunity for them to do that and have that funded. Or if I'm in my senior year and I need to take a course in the spring semester, this is where they're leveraging this program, is to take courses not otherwise available. This is also the source that funds the vast majority of your dual enrollment courses in the state. 76,000 course enrollments in this program every year. 70 of the 76,000 course enrollments that this program funds is dual enrollment.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I asked the question earlier about the list of courses that were eligible for CDF funding, and the response I got was the CDF eligibility list. And there's a really good conversation going on here about braiding of funds. Is there a case or is there a conversation that CDF funds can be used for dual enrollment?
CDF funds can be used for career and technical education dual enrollment. And yes, since 2022, since this has been in effect, we have shared that guidance and shared those resources.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you.
Anything else? So this concludes the Section 4 review. We'll go into Section 3. However, I would be okay with a 10-minute recess just to stretch your legs. Is everyone okay with it? All right. We'll come back at 10 minutes to 3. Thank you. It is 2:50, so let's continue. Next item, please.
Next item is a consideration of an overview of programs within MFP Formula Funding Level 3.
I have a motion. Ms. Shumpine, second. Ms. Posey, thank you. Okay. Ms. Beth, all yours.
Okay. All right, level 3, there's 3.
It's coming up.
Got it? Okay. Level 3 has 3 allocations in it. There's a continuation of prior year pay raises, the historical formula allocation, and the mandated cost allocation. We'll go through each one of those. The total cost, just to give you a visual on that, right now of level 3 is right at about $600 million. So first, we'll talk about the item that's the continuation of prior year pay raises. This actually is made up of pay raises that were given in the mid to early 2000s. They were similar to the pay raises given in more recent years by the legislature, and they impacted the instructional or certificated staff and the support staff as well. So the history shows that in 2001, 2002, a certificated pay raise of $2,060 was provided just for certificated. Then the next year, a support pay raise was provided by the state of $476. Then in 2006-07, a certificated and a support raise was provided, $1,500 for certificated and $500 for support. And then in 07-08, there was another certificated pay raise of $2,375 with a support pay raise of $1,000. And then finally, in 08-09, a certificated pay raise of $1,019 was provided. So those are relatively long years ago. It came to be where we gave out funding each year based on the cost that was allocated in the first year that the pay raise was given. And so later on in the discussions with Bessie and the legislature, it was determined that we would change that dollar amount, the total amount that was being provided on an annual basis for the pay raises, into a per pupil amount. So that meant that we took all the pay raise, millions of dollars that were being allocated, we divided that by the student count in the year in which the calculation was done and created a unique per pupil for every school district. And once we did that, it was then to be distributed subsequent to that based on, based on student counts. So that meant if you had a district that was growing, their allocation would increase based on the number of students that had been added in the count, annual student count, or if you were losing, then we would also, there would be a decline in the allocations based on the theory that if you had less kids, you had a little less money that you needed to provide those continuing pay raises because you might need a few less instructors or support workers. This is the history of the cost of these pay raises since 1920. As you can see, the cost has slightly decreased because this allocation is tied to students, and we have lost students since that time statewide. Not in every situation. This is just a state level view. Some districts obviously have grown while others have declined. As the charter schools have grown over the years, we have gone back and calculated, depending on where they were located and the students from which they will enroll students, we actually have calculated an individual pay raise amount for them as well. And so they are the beneficiaries of this allocation through the piggyback of the charter per pupil amount, which is a whole discussion we've not had yet, but they are provided these amounts just like the traditional city and parish school districts as well. The data source, again, is based on student count and the per pupil amounts that were calculated. These are scheduled and must be provided to staff to continue these pay raises over the years. That's basically the the math right now on how they're calculated. We do this on an annual basis. And again, you'll see fluctuations. The key thing about level 3 is these things are all in level 3 because they are primarily all based on student counts. They are unlike level 4 where each one of those programs has their own methodology. These 3 that you'll see here now are all tied to student counts, and the philosophy, again, is based on fluctuations that, should occur. That was the legislature and Bessie's position at the time, that it should go up or down based on the number of students because this is a student-driven formula. Are there any questions on the continuation of prior year pay raises?
Questions,
section?
comments? Yes, Ms. Posey, I remember.
Beth, on slide 54, when you talked about the change to the calculation, what year was that? Was that?
I don't have that right, but it's probably in around I would say around 2012, maybe a little bit before that.
Okay, and was that a certain bill or?
It was a certain formula. It was all adopted in the formula, the way that the methodology was changed.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Anyone else? All right,
Okay.
moving on.
Now we'll move on to the historical formula allocation. You may have heard this called whole harmless because this provision has been in there since 1992-93 when this formula was first adopted by Bessie and the legislature. And what this originally represented was at the time that this formula, which is student-driven, was derived by Bessie and the legislature. The prior formula for many years before that was expense-driven. And so when the simulations were run, where we would change from an expense-driven formula, which meant that school systems submitted the cost of expenses to the department, and then you calculated the amount that the formula was supposed to provide based on expense. Instead, it went to a student-driven formula. And when that was done, there was originally 11 school systems who, by the new formula, which is the formula now, would have been entitled to way more money than that new formula calculated. So an agreement was made between Bessie and the legislature that that money would not be removed, that there would be a whole harmless provision, and that is common when formulas are changed across the states in the country, that you don't want to necessarily harm the school systems. And so an agreement was made that those 11 systems would actually continue to get that extra money for many, many years. And that went on for a very long time where they continued to get that extra money. So that started in 92, 93. It wasn't until 07, 08 that legislature and Bessie adopted a revised plan that said, this has probably been going on long enough, and we need to look and see, do these districts, should they be entitled to these funds, or do they need these funds any longer? And in that particular resolution, which was adopted, they agreed that money would be removed from those districts over 10 years. We did calculate there was a small part of the money that they were receiving that we actually could go back and look at documentation that substantiated that 9 of those districts had somehow that we somehow needed to continue about $30-something million of pay raise money and insurance money that had been provided to them prior to the change in the formula. We could substantiate that. And so in that year, the money that they were not deemed to be necessary to be given out, which is about $30-something million, $36 million. The remaining money was removed at a 1/10 of amount over those next 10 years. And when we did that, you actually took that other $36 million and you started reallocating that to every other school system in the state. So that meant over the 10 years, that $36 million on a student count basis got reallocated to all the other school systems. And so now we've completed that 10 years, and in 1920, we started just a very clean calculation where these 9 school systems that remain continue to get the, because 2 dropped out. Once we removed that cash, we did not have substantiating documentation that they were entitled to this money for either retirement or insurance or pay raise costs. So 2 dropped out. And so from then forward, those 9 school systems continue to get that $36 million. And then the other school systems are allocated the remainder of that money on a student count basis. It's been like that since 1920. So it's $38 million, sorry. The reallocation is actually $38 million. And you can see, that, again, that shifts in the allocation based on student counts. If you're gaining students, you get a little more of that money. You're losing students, you get a little bit less. So that is really what the hold harmless, we decided to change the name because at that point it was no longer a hold harmless provision. That really went away, and this was just a historical formula allocation to kind of distinguish where we actually, stopped the hold harmless process and moved to this reallocation and allocation process. Again, these are driven by students. There is no expenditure requirements on this money. This is actually given to the school systems, those, not the 9 school systems. They can spend it however they need to. It's looked at as kind of a repayment of cash that they are entitled to from that long-standing process. Is there any questions on that?
I do. I have one. I have questions. I'm sorry. It's like my own personal learning session. So you talk about student-driven formula. I remain confused why there has to be level 3. Like level 1 is student-driven fund. Like why can't you just use level 1 funding formula to fund what's in level 3? Why does there have to be a level 3?
Well, the history really has driven that, up until now, because in fact, you want to make sure that the pay raises that we talk about, the continuation pay raises, that those go out there. It's the philosophy and the methodology is similar to what we do now in level 4. In order to make sure that that pay raise money, you can see it and you know how much is actually going out to each of the school systems.
It's more a mandate versus a formula that is, again, based on the needs within.
Right. The things in level 3 and the things in level 4 were the decisions made between Bessie and the legislature when these were all enacted to be more program specific. And so that's why they are called out, and done in specific different methodologies across 3 and 4, level 3 and 4.
I don't like it. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, on to mandated costs.
All right. So mandated cost is a specific allocation. It was implemented to help at the time because there were just tremendous increases in health insurance and fuel and retirement in the year it was first implemented. Again, this is allocated out based on student counts. It first started in 0405, where it was implemented as a $60 per student allocation. And then in 0607, Bessie and the legislature agreed it could be increased to $80 per student. In 0708, again, it was increased to $91.50 per student. And in 0809, it was increased to $100 per student. It remains at $100 currently. Last year, Bessie recommended to the legislature that this be increased based on the fact that the cost of living has gone up so much. And it was recommended that $32 be added, $33 be added to this allocation. And with the formula not being adopted last year, it does continue to be at $100 in 0405.
So we tried, we did our job, we tried.
It's still just an example to me, though, of I just don't understand. I can appreciate the history, and years ago there was inflation or whatever, but it just seems like this is $100 per student that could easily sit in level 1 and be used as districts and charters, see that it's needed, whether that's health or transportation cost or whatever.
Well, and the difference is that once you put anything in level 1, it then becomes part of the equity the calculation that divides the cost based on the ability of the school systems to support education and the part that the state's responsible for. So there is no way to trace a dollar exactly into that everybody will get that same $100, because if you are a more wealthy school system and the state only puts up, say, 50 or 60% of the cost in your district, you're not necessarily going to benefit a whole $100 per student. So it could mean that there would be some kind of reduction for you because you are more able to support the cost that we estimate. The same could be true for those who are less wealthy. There are some systems who we actually pay up to 80% or more of the cost of education as we estimated in the formula, and they may actually be receiving a little more than that $100. But it all hinges on level 1, on the ability of the school systems to support education in their communities. And that's the equity piece of the formula that has been tested in court. Unlike some other states who have struggled with this for years, Louisiana's has been equitable for many, many years, and it is because of the philosophy and the methodology that we use in level 1. That was tested, that was designed by education experts from, out of state many years ago. It has stood the test of time. There are some states who are just now getting into the, student-driven formula and having things be based on the fact, what is the contribution necessary for the school systems and the state. The Constitution requires it be a partnership. And we will go over level 1, and level 2 has its own unique methodology, but we'll go over level 1 at the December meeting and talk more about how that actually, the philosophy and the mechanics behind that. But it is designed to be a partnership, and that's why the majority of the money in the $4 billion is actually distributed in that fashion. That is the philosophy of the student-driven formula. It was designed, I'll share one more thing, it was designed based on that the money should go to the school systems as a block grant, primarily because they make the decisions closest to the child, and it was driven by students, not just on how much they would spend in the prior year. It was meant to be attached to the students that they educate, and those with special characteristics. So again, we'll go more depth in that in December. Are there any other questions on mandated cost? This just shows you, again, similar to the other level 3, that it's gone down because we've lost students since 1920, so the cost has actually decreased. And that's all I have on mandated cost.
Questions? Well, Ms. Beth, thank you again so much for all of this. We're at the public comment section, and it looks to me like we have 2 people here that's representing the public. Y'all have anything to say?
Mr.
Yes,
Birkin,
yes.
can we get this emailed to us, the PowerPoint?
Yeah, Kevin will do that.
Thank you,
after.
Mr. Kevin.
I can't thank you guys enough, and Beth, thank you again, putting all of this together. Great discussion. Am I understanding that you'd like to do 1 and 2 together in December?
I will try. It might be kind of long. We've spent a couple of hours, but we'll definitely cover 1. If we need to push anything, it would be level 2.
Well, because, if we, for some reason, come to some conclusion that we do want to go back to the legislature to ask for some changes, then we will need to have that by January timeframe.
I do have one little bit of information, and I don't know if y'all remember. Just a reminder, in the end of the 23 legislative session, and y'all did it properly last year, the House committee voted 99-2 to take the teachers' 2,000, 1,000 stipends and put it in the MFP permanently. So when we submit, or Bessie submits, we'd like to remind them that if that's possible. I think Appropriations is looking at education on Friday, and it might be a good time just to remind them. It would be nice to do if they could, but just something I remember they did.
Okay, anything else? Anyone else? Our next meeting then will be in the afternoon of the December meeting, December 11th. So look forward to seeing all of you then. Thank you for your participation, and we are adjourned.